Recently, I was in my Santa Barbara office. I'm working at my computer, and I encountered a problem. And I'm not very good with computers. So I called my friend Brandon Vaught, who's not only a very able content director here at Word on Fire, but he's also a trained engineer and kind of a tech whiz. So got Brandon on the phone, and he tried to kind of talk me through the issue, but it wasn't going very well. So finally he said, let me just take over your screen. So he has this capacity to make some moves where he is, and he can actually take over and work on my screen. And he was in Atlanta at the time at a conference, and from Atlanta he begins then to manipulate, the cursor, and he solved the problem. So when it was finished, I said to him, and I'm always kind of amazed by that. And I said, now I know this is a stupid question, but is this all done through like phone lines, or are satellites? Is outer space involved in what you just did? So I'm sure he was suppressing a laugh, but he kind of patiently explained to me about digital data and breaking down and waves and phone lines. And he said in some cases, or at least partially, satellites are indeed involved in this process. And then he said to me something that was kind of interesting in a kind of dreamy voice. He said, it always reminds me of the communion of saints. And I said, well, you better unpack that one for me. He said, well, look, we send up all this information to satellites. Think from computers and GPS systems and iPhones and everything else, going up to these satellites that receive the information, huge amounts of it, and then send information back to Earth. And this is happening all the time. And he said, it reminds me of the way we send information up to heaven and how influence comes back from heaven. I said, well, now, wouldn't that make an interesting little reflection? So this is the reflection. Think for a second now, as Catholics, we invoke Mary all the time. So this morning, I prayed my rosary. So over and over again, I prayed, Hail Mary, full of grace. And I'm not just, exercising my mind, or I'm not just saying pious things. In some very real way, I'm convinced that Mary hears those prayers and responds to them. Now think of all the people all over the world who are praying in different languages, the Hail Mary. Think of the way we invoke the saints. All over the world, every day, all the time, Catholics invoking the saints, praying for their intercession, asking for favors, addressing them. And more to it, we're convinced that the saints can, in some cases, respond to us and actually have an effect in the world. Now, I realize there's a temptation, especially today, to see this as, just so much, pre-scientific mumbo-jumbo. I mean, how can anyone really take seriously that Mary in heaven is actually hearing these prayers? I mean, isn't it just a lot of wishful thinking and kind of a pre-modern fantasy? Well, again, keep Brandon's comparison in mind. There are machines of our contrivance up in the heavens right now that are indeed receiving enormous amounts of information and sending enormous amounts of information in such a way that the world here below is changed. Every time I get in my car and I'm tooling along, and there's my GPS system working beautifully. Well, that involves information going up. Now think of all the cars. I don't know how many go to which satellites and all that, but think of all the information from all these cars going up to these satellites and then coming down and very really influencing the world. If it can happen at that level, why couldn't we say a fortiori, even more powerfully can happen in regard to intelligences at a higher pitch of existence? See, now think about the angels and the saints and the Blessed Mother. Not just, other beings in our ordinary world, but intelligences at a higher, more intense pitch of existence. If our little machines that we make can do this extraordinary thing, how much more could these realities, who listen now, are participating in the supreme and infinite intelligence of God? Think of the angels, the saints, Blessed Mother, as participating more intensely in the all-embracing intelligence of God. Why would we find it so hard to believe that Mary indeed hears all the Hail Marys being offered to her? That Mary indeed can't influence the world. The saints can't have an impact on the world. Here's another angle on this thing. We think of matter and spirit in a very modern way, a Cartesian way. So remember Rene Descartes said that the soul is like a captive inside the body. It's the ghost in the machine, right? It's in there. That's not the way Thomas Aquinas thought about the soul. Thomas said the soul is in the body, not as contained by it, but as containing it. That's a line that I think spend a whole retreat thinking about that. The soul is in the body, but not as contained by it, like a little ghost in the machine, but rather the soul, the spiritual, is more embracing. The spiritual dominates the material. It affects the material in the most dramatic way. And so the spiritual realm of the angels, the saints, God ultimately, has a massive impact on the material world because it's at a higher pitch of existence. Okay, here's a last comparison. Think again of the satellites. As we're going along in the highway, we're using our cell phones, we're using our computers, and satellites are intimately involved in the functioning of all these things. How often do you even think about them? I mean, the satellite is out of sight. It's up there somewhere. I don't even see it. I don't think about it. I'm at my computer sending messages and doing various things, email. And how often do I think of all this? And yet these invisible realities, these unseen realities, have an enormous impact on our ordinary lives. How much more the saints, the angels, the Blessed Mother, who are unseen, invisible realities, and yet can have a massive impact on the world of our ordinary experience. Why would we find that? We who are now so accustomed to these things, why would we find this so hard to believe? So I guess I'd throw this out as a little challenge, maybe something to lift you up spiritually. If next time you're using your computer, or you're in your car with the GPS, you're using your cell phone, maybe think of the community of saints.